Hello guys, now we will go through Software Supply Chain Risk Management chapter, Certified Secure Software Lifecycle Professional course from UCertify. This is very short chapter. Applying risk management principles to the entire supply chain is a good business practice. Even more critical when software included in final products has third-party components. This lesson explores the concepts behind supply chain risk management, including how to analyze software for third-party sources of risk. The overall purpose of supplier risk assessment is to identify and maintain an appropriate set of risk controls within the overall supply chain. Given the threats implicit in the supply chain process, supplier risk assessment are a particularly critical part of the effort to maintain effective supplier control. Supplier risk assessments identify specific threats to the organization's supply chain and then evaluate how likely those threats are to occur, as well as the consequences of each threat should it happen. In that respect, supplier risk assessments underwrite the development of the specific strategy that will be used to ensure trust up and down the overall supply chain. Alright. According to the General Accounting Office, GAO, threats to supply chains fall into 5 generic categories. Installation of malicious logic in hardware or software, installation of counterfeit hardware or software, failure or disruption in the production or distribution of critical product or service, reliance on a malicious or unqualified service provider for the performance of a technical service, installation of unintentional vulnerabilities in software or hardware, counterfeit. Supplier risk assessment lessens all of these concerns by providing assurance that the supplier employs a consistent, disciplined process that ensures measurable product integrity. Supplier risk assessments identify what could go wrong in the development process, determine which risks to address, set mitigation priorities, implement actions to address high priority risks, and bring those risks to within acceptable levels. Supplier risk assessments let managers deploy the necessary proactive and reactive controls to respond to threats as they arise in the supply chain. This process also monitors the effectiveness of those controls once they have been put in place. The general aim of supplier risk assessment is to ensure up-to-date knowledge about the supply chain's overall threat situation. Systematic supplier risk assessments explicitly guide the prioritization of the steps that the organization will take to ensure the security and integrity of its products. Risk assessment models are used to manage future risk, whether the risk emanates from within the organization or via a supplier. While there are many risk management models, the concepts are fundamentally the same, and the best model for managing supplier risk would be one that is aligned with your internal risk management. Common to all models is a set of 4 elements: identification, assessment, response, and Monitoring. In the identification step, the items that may bring risk into the enterprise must be identified. In the case of software components, this might seem simple, but software is often built using software components, so the entire software bill of materials is a legitimate set of items. So software bill of materials is a list that has components from which the software is built. Yeah, and the full name is SBOM, which is software bill of materials. Okay. This name. Let's color this blue. Once all the items are identified, they need to be assessed with respect to the threats and the vulnerabilities associated with each asset and the likelihood of their occurrence. For each identified issue, a plan needs to be created to respond to the risk. This plan should detail what is being done by the supplier and what aspects are borne by the purchaser. With respect to dealing with vulnerabilities, an important issue is detailing the life cycle of maintenance and patching as vulnerabilities are discovered over the life of a project. The response phase is just that, determining who does what over the course of a product's life cycle with respect to the vulnerabilities. Just stating a supplier will provide patches may or may not be sufficient. There are timelines to consider, as well as the issue of patches to sub-supplier supplied items. All plans are subject to failures in practice, so a monitor phase is put in place to ensure the agreed upon terms are being followed and working. Okay. Third-party software is software that is not written by in-house personnel. Before someone thinks that they don't have third-party software, know that open source libraries are third-party. Studies have shown that the majority of code developed today includes third-party library calls, so the issues associated with understanding the risks from third-party software apply to most firms. The primary focus of secure lifecycle development programs is to ensure the security of code being generated. Third-party code frequently gets overlooked, and there are many options associated with this gap. The first and most obvious is to have a monitoring program in place that gets notified of updates to third-party code and incorporate those updates into your normal update process. If a vulnerability is serious enough, it may trigger your update process to issue a patch to your code. Fixing the embedded code, the second option, and one that should be used in conjunction with the first option, is to subject third-party software to the same security testing regime as your own code. Software bill of materials that I mentioned earlier. Software is frequently composed of multiple parts, including sections of code from libraries and other sources. A software bill of materials is a listing of the provenance and lineage of all components in software. I will take a screenshot of this. In software, including libraries, third-party code, and internally generated code. Listing the versions for all included elements is important when it comes to identifying and remediating vulnerabilities. An item of increasing importance is the lineage of all the components that are in a software build. This becomes a security issue when one of the components, for example, an embedded library, has a vulnerability. This has been seen in many recent security issues such as a hard bleed and OpenVPN. Even major vendors such as Microsoft have had this problem, as shown in the SQL Slammer worm affecting not just SQL Server products but also third-party software developed using the SQL engine. To understand the risk associated with the components inside the software build, many have called for the production of a software bill of materials detailing the constructs and versions contained within a build. Lineage and provenance. Let's see. The easier translation of what they said is, so software is built from many pieces: libraries, third-party code, internal code. SBOM is a list of those pieces and their history. So it helps find vulnerabilities, understand risks, trace problems back to the source. So lineage in this context means how components are connected. And provenance means, in this context, where the code came from, who created it, whether it's trusted, the source. Example for provenance: GitHub repo, npm package, your company code, and lineage is example is library A depends on B and B depends on C, and the other chains of the dependencies. Verify pedigree and provenance. In many respects, the issues that apply to software authenticity and integrity assurance are the same as those for publishing and dissemination. As the components of a product move through the supply chain, they have to be authenticated at the interface between the different supply chain elements and their integrity assured. Although integrity checking is probably a continuous process throughout the production of any given artifact, the authentication normally takes place at the interface between two levels of or organizations in the supply chain process. Authentication follows the same standard principles for non-repudiation of origin as any other access control activity. At the physical level, the endpoint have to authenticate to each other, and man-in-the-middle possibilities have to be eliminated. Endpoint authentication is a classic issue that has been addressed by numerous conventional software protocols. Authenticity of the package is confirmed by the number of digital signing organizations, certificate authorities such as public key infrastructure, certificate authority, or specialized checksums, hashes, and other mathematical tools for obtaining irrefutable proof of authenticity. Determining the level of integrity of a component is always a problem. There are so many ways to integrity can be threatened. Generally, all the common secure software assurance methods apply to integrity checking, such as targeted bench checks, static and dynamic tests, audits, and reviews. However, there is a special case with counterfeiting. A counterfeit pass up a supply chain from unscrupulous suppliers can threaten the integrity of the entire system. And since those components are meant to emulate the legitimate part, they are hard to spot by conventional means. Anti-counterfeiting methods include trusted foundry, vetting, and other forms of direct supplier control. Trusted foundry vetting. Okay, the fact that software is produced via a supply chain does not eliminate the need to understand and verify the necessary testing regimes employed as part of the developed process. These aspects are best handled via process validation and product testing. Secure transfer of code include updates and critical function, unlike a physical object, which would be difficult to intercept in transit and modify without being detected. Software is a digital item, a series of ones and zeros that are subject to interception and manipulation, and if intercepted and modified without precautions and mitigations in place, the changes would be nearly impossible to detect. This is not a new, particularly challenging problem, because known solutions in the form of code signing and cryptographically secured communication channels have existed for decades and are common practice. It is important to ensure that these methods are actually being used and the veracity of third-party code can be attested to before being integrated into production process. System sharing and interconnections are becoming more common in today's connected world. System interconnections are direct connections to external third-party systems, and these direct connections can become a risk conduct into the internal process. The most prominent example is cloud services. Someone jokingly once defined cloud computing as using someone else's computer. But in fact, that is really not far from the truth. When you have external cloud services as part of your build process or internal to enable sharing across geographically separated offices, there is a third-party supplier risk. Examining your systems for these interconnections is not hard, but the time to identify them is before they are contracted for, ensuring that the requisite security requirements are factored in from the beginning. While this may not seem important, in 2021, a data center fire in France caused a massive outage across the web for many days. Code repository security. Code repositories are the locations where secure source code is stored while being built and for current and past versions, just as the need for securing backups. The code repository needs even greater protections. The code repository represents the current past version of the work. This means the repository needs to have protection. If an attacker can make an undetected change to a module in the code repository, it will likely make it into production. Repository should be given the same level of scrutiny as a company's bank account. This seems like a minor issue, but many companies have had issues with unauthorized changes. Build environment security will typically include continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. These are the result of multiple small regular code commits to a repository that can then automatically trigger builds and run comprehensive testing. Sometimes this is done on a scheduled basis. These changes can come from internal sources or third-party sources. It is important to consider third-party code changes in the overall design of the build environment. The security of the system comes from many small incremental changes, all tracked and all capable of being backed out of the system if testing failures occur. For this system to work securely, the security of the pipeline is paramount. Lesson 16. Cryptographically hashed digitally signed components. Code signing is a powerful anti-tampering methodology. The technique can be unobtrusive to the user of the code, but if built into the process, everyone can have faith in the veracity of the included code elements. Right to audit. As with all process-related elements, the process is key to success, but it still requires a monitoring step to ensure that the process is functioning correctly. With respect to third-party software elements, where it makes sense to impose process controls on suppliers, it also makes sense to have the right to audit those processes. This provides a means to determine whether the controls are functioning as designed and whether they are effective. That's it. That's a short, amazing lesson. That's why I read it tonight before I went to sleep. Supplier risk assessment and all hazards of the specific risks associated with a supplier or supply chain element. Let's start the quiz now. Code signing can be used for all of this, I would say. Let's see what the chat says. Supplier security levels are best ensured through the use of what? Audits? I would go with audits. Standards. I'm not sure if this is standards. I don't know where in text that was, but we will see. Standards, audits, risk. It looked like there are like two good answers. Studies have shown that the majority of code developed today what about here? Maybe analyze security levels are best ensured. Are you sure? Standards? Audits. Oh, wow. So I was right. Where in text did you find that? Look at this sentence. The process also monitors the effectiveness of those controls once they have been put in place. Monitors effectiveness. Not sure. You know, it's like standards and audits. Everything sounds right. In that respect, supplier underrate the development of specific strategy. Disciplined process. Damn it. I am not sure. Identification, assessment, maybe models, contracts, processes. I usually lose points because those answers are like so close. Implement software. Okay, let's go with standards. I don't know. Software pedigree is an examination of what? Determining level of integrity. Oh shit. Pedigree. Oh, that's on verification of what? Of provenance, right? Examination of what? The source. Pedigree is the source. Yeah, the source. Okay. Software authenticity requires controls to ensure what? Non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, I would say. Risk assessment models are used to manage future risk, that is I would say all of these, because the risks can stem from any of those listed sources. Which of the following is not faced in supplier risk assessment? I'll go this way. Oh, it's here. Identification. Save. Identification, assessment, response, and monitoring. Identification, assessment, response, and monitoring. Identification, assessment, response, and monitoring. Response and monitoring. Software provenance is not a phase. What is software bill of materials? A copy of source and object code bases, a listing of who wrote the code, a listing of provenance and lineage. All of this, I mean, it's like all the components of the code. It is all the components of the code, right? Okay. Copy of source and yeah, okay, that doesn't make sense, right? Which of the following will most likely include third-party code? Code base associated with a product that was obtained when your firm merged. Current code base written by internal developers. Previous release, but they can use the libraries. So the libraries are third party. Internal codes are third parties. Okay, question number 9. Which of the following requires specific infrastructure security to protect intellectual property? Which of the following requires specific infrastructure security? Oh boy. Third-party assessment. Infrastructure. All of them? I am not sure now. All of them, okay. That's what I thought, but it was like 4 answers. That's too many, right? Supplier risk assessments are designed to determine what? Mitigation, risks, what could go wrong? Yep. Okay, and 100. Ah! I get C. Protect code in transit. Energy. Wow. Supplier processes. Holy moly. And oh god, software materials. Okay, never mind. It's not the first time I get C. Okay, have a good night. That's all for tonight.